Excuse me. It's a pretty darn good song, isn't it? Leon Russell, Superstar, of course, made popular by people like Joe Cocker and my personal favorite, Karen Carpenter's voice on that. But look at that. It's in the key of E minor, and it starts on F sharp. Just listen to that. Listen to the voicing, and it's not like a weird jazz voicing in the chord, it's the melody. You're playing an E minor chord, and the note is an F sharp. Such a great melody, and you can do that with a 1,000-piece orchestra or just on a guitar. It's not the arrangement necessarily. It's great to have a nice arrangement or a great voice like Karen Carpenter, but it's the melody of that. It's such a well crafted little melody. Whenever I think of that one and so many others, but that one in particular always amazes me. All of which brings us to the topic at hand, if you'll excuse me. One of the great questions of our time. Can God make a rock so big that even he can't lift it? No, actually, the question I'm going to discuss is, does new music stink? Does new music suck? And I've thought about it a little bit. I'm just going to do kind of one of these chill out chats. I've got some notes here. I'm just going to load it up right from the cell phone. We'll see how it goes. If I hem and haw too much, I might think better of it. But I wanted to talk a little bit about it because, you know, I've always suspected in the last several years that, yeah, new music isn't that good. And I'm always hesitant to say that because, you know, I don't want to sound like some old guy that's getting older, you know, kind of get off my lawn, okay, boomer, all those kinds of things. And it's also true that there's a lot of music I didn't used to like that I've learned to appreciate. You know, I just saw Madonna do the Super Bowl in 2012. You know, I would have never listened to Madonna in the 80s, but I was listening to it. You know, it's actually very well done music, and it's good songwriting, and there's a lot of keyboard. I think it's got that 80s keyboard sound. So I was, and you know, over the years I've learned to respect at least disco. You know, disco, I was a disco sucks, you know, person back in Detroit in the late 70s, and when disco was popular. Of course, I was a teenager, so what did I know? But, you know, when I listen to a little bit of disco now, like Yvonne Elliman or some of that Bee Gees stuff, I just totally wrote off. I'll hear good guitar, great bass guitar. I mean, really good bass guitar, good rhythms, and a lot of times good orchestration on some of that nicer disco. I still don't like disco, but you know, so there are a lot of things that I didn't like at the time that I kind of dismissed, and over the years, I've at least come to see the music in it and appreciate it. And I think that's a good lesson. The other thing is I'm always a little hesitant because really, who of us gets to judge whether music's good or not, you know? I mean, there were people 50 years ago that thought the Beatles stunk or the Rolling Stones stunk, and I'm sure people once upon a time didn't like Frank Sinatra, although it's hard for me to imagine any musician not liking Frank Sinatra because that stuff's just outstanding. Now, some of those Nelson Riddle arrangements. But, you know, it is true that sometimes you think, well, music's no good now, and that's sort of almost become a trope, older people saying new music stinks. But I listen to some music, and, you know, I think, by golly, it's not just me. That music's not any good compared to the stuff I grew up with. And if you're like me, if you're around my age, or if you've been fortunate enough to listen to it, even if you're younger, you listen to some of the best music ever made in history. I really believe that. You know, anything from the 20th century popular music in general is some of the best music ever made in history. And the classic rock period is right in there in the thick of one of the greatest popular music eras in history, I think, and really and you know, it was kind of a dynamic. You had radio, you had Hollywood, and the piano kind of came of age. You had a lot of piano players earlier in the 20th century. Then when Elvis came around and the Beatles, a lot of things changed the guitar, but there was still such good music in that period. And really all the way through, I don't know, the 90s. The other thing is, there's probably good music out there. So if I were to say new music stinks, there's nothing as good as the Beatles. I imagine there might be good bands as good as the Beatles out there, or the Stones, or any of the bands in the 60s and 70s that were so good. There's so many, and I'll think, I don't really hear any. To my knowledge, there's not any bands that I would say are as good as like any of those great classic rock bands. But then I realized, well, that's probably not true for sure. That I feel like that's probably not true. But what I do feel like is true is there's such a fragmentation of our culture. So you might have a band out there that plays as well as the Who, has songs as good as Pete Townsend, singer as good as Roger Daltrey, all that stuff. And somebody might say, "Oh, you don't think the music today is as good?" Well, you should check out this Spotify playlist and this one band that's got some songs on there, and it might be one out of literally millions of songs on Spotify, and it's so buried. And I guess in a way that kind of goes to my point, which even if there are bands out there that are good, it's not popular music. See, if you've got some band that might be as good as the Beatles, theoretically speaking, certainly possible, and they're buried on some Spotify playlist, that's not really popular music. I'm talking about popular music. The great tradition of popular music. Europe has the tradition of classical music. America has a great, great tradition of popular music, and it kind of intersected with our media culture in the 20th century. And so even if there are bands out there that can play like, write songs as well as the Bee Gees, play as well as the Who, Yes, I don't know, whatever. If they're buried in some Spotify playlist, or it's not really the same, because I'm talking about popular music, and I listen to some popular music, and some of the stuff that's in the mainstream. Once in a while, I actually, frankly, don't listen to it very often, but when I do, I often come away saying, I think I might be right. I just don't think the music's that good now compared to what I grew up with. And I'm not the only one who thinks that, but it is the kind of thing, I don't know about anyone else, but I hesitate to run around saying it. And I'm not really saying it here. I mean, I'm just giving my sort of feelings. I wouldn't even say they're my thoughts. These are my feelings. I'm opening up my heart. When I hear a lot of newer music, that's what my heart says. It's not as good, and my heart might be wrong. And I'm trying to catch my head up with my heart, and I still come up with this feeling that the music today isn't as good. I'll tell you a couple things that do leap to mind a little bit. One is melody. Now, you heard me play that Leon Russell song, which is such a masterpiece just in melody. We have a very highly evolved scale in Western music. I'll call it Western music. I don't know if that's the best term, but Western music, our scale is very highly evolved. They have different scales in different parts of the world. I don't know how accurate it is, but sometimes I play the Arabic scale. But those are unusual intervals. And our great tradition of melody comes from certain intervals. Like that Arabic scale has some unusual intervals. They sound kind of odd to our ears, and you wouldn't hear those intervals very often in American popular music. I remember in choir, when I was in church choir, this would be like 4th or 5th grade, but we had a really good choir director, and every once in a while he'd give us little lessons. We were just kids, and he'd kind of give us little lessons on reading music, and things like that. They weren't nothing heavy, but one time I remember he was talking to us a bit about intervals and melodies, and in church is another place where you have a lot of good melodies, but he was explaining the 6. So, you have the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, the scale, and you go from 1 to 6, do, and he was explaining that's a 6th. And then he explained, well, that interval is My Bonnie Lies Over the Ocean. My Bonnie lies over the ocean. That's a little melody. Every note counts. My Bonnie lies. Oh, it's like one of those bouncing balls they used to have on the cartoon. My Bonnie lies over the ocean. And we've got that scale, and it's almost like a mysterious, magical thing when a great song kind of selects notes from this scale and arranges them in certain patterns with certain timings, and you end up with these great melodies. And I'm just talking about pure melodies. I'm not talking about arrangement. I think a lot of times when people hear music, they hear arrangements, they hear image, they hear celebrity, but I'm talking about just the pure melodies, like Rodgers and Hammerstein, all the, Jerome Kern, Cole Porter, and so many of the great melodies. But I remember he talked about the fourth, Here Comes the Bride, and he said that was a fourth, and I've always remembered that. I was maybe in fourth grade, but he kind of explained that. It was a very simple, rudimentary lesson, but it was the kind of thing that stuck with me as a kid. Here Comes the Bride, that's a fourth. One thing that occurs to me is when you're little and you hear all those songs, like I didn't know what a sixth was. I actually played the piano somewhat, pretty well for a kid already by that age, but I mean, I didn't really. But I knew one thing I did know at that age. I knew My Bonnie Lies Over the Ocean. I knew Here Comes the Bride. Those tunes were already in my head. And so he was really just explaining the theory behind songs that were in my head. He wasn't explaining theory to music I'd never heard before. He was kind of just briefly explaining the theory of these songs that even as a kid I knew really well. I probably could have sung My Bonnie Lies Over the Ocean, the first verse anyway, all the way through, at that age, because everybody, I feel like most people my age, at least with my background, would have known that song. But when you grow up, you hear those musical intervals, and that's such an important part of how we process music. And so you get, and Leon Russell, by the way, was raised a Baptist, but when you hear all those tunes, then you're an adult, you've just got, it's in your DNA, all those intervals, all those little patterns, and you can make your own, but it teaches you good melody. And I think that's what a lot of those songs back then had, was really good melody. And I just think, I mentioned Rodgers and Hammerstein, but in classic rock, you've got all kinds of great melodies. All that 60s music that was in AM often had terrific melodies. Look at My Way, but look at stuff like Nights in White Satin, Nights in White Satin. That is, you can just play that on an acoustic guitar. It has the London Philharmonic on it, Days of Future Past. That's got to be one of the great albums ever made. Tuesday Afternoons on that album as well. But that's such a good melody. And that's what I sometimes don't hear that in newer music, And I know styles change. Like, I think that's one thing about Madonna and some of those bands I always said I didn't like, but I didn't like that 80s keyboard sound. I wasn't particularly crazy about the comb bras and her whole kind of 80s material girl image. But especially as I've gotten older, I've come to realize that actually those songs are really well done, and they do have melodies in them. They're pretty cleverly written melodies. As a matter of fact, I just watched that Super Bowl performance in 2012 just a little while ago. By the way, just on a side note, she looked great in that Super Bowl performance in 2012, and it didn't look like that was, 11 years ago. And, we saw her the other night at the Grammys, and she looked like her face, she's had some work done on her face or something. That's up to her. I'm not commenting on it, but there are several people have commented on it, and usually not in a favorable way. And I was just thinking, well, that was 11 years ago. She looked great in that Super Bowl performance, just terrific, But anyway, you've got those melodies like that, and like Paul McCartney, yesterday, all my troubles seem so far. Those you could take those. In fact, I think yesterday that was so nice that George Martin, and they didn't even put much in there, or anything like Edelweiss, it's kind of like those are melodies where every note is in that scale. And I was thinking of some of the newer music I've heard, which admittedly isn't all that much. And the one artist I can think of that compares unfavorably with some of that earlier music was Kanye West. Now, whenever I see people mention Kanye West on TV, till his recent troubles, but I'm talking about more traditionally. I didn't even know who he was or what he sang really, but people would always say, "Oh, he's brilliant. He's one of the most brilliant musicians ever, and he's so talented." You know, they made him sound like Bach or something. Then one day I saw that "Closed on Sunday." I don't even remember where I saw it. Came out a couple years ago. And I was like, "Closed on Sunday, you're my Chick-fil-A. Closed on Sunday." I mean, it was like two notes. And I kind of had that reaction with, was it that WAP song by, what's her name? Carly B or something like that. But, you know, it was disgusting. It was coarse. It was low class. It was materialistic. It was kind of dehumanizing and all those things. I agree with a lot of that. And I've certainly heard my share of dirty songs, so I wasn't really judging that, but it was coarse. And, you know, most of the dirty songs I've heard in my life have been in a bar or something, not a, you know, mostly. Actually, I was thinking Chuck Berry, My Ding-a-Ling. There were some kind of double entendre songs that were out on AM radio back then I listened to as a kid. But anyway, the same thing. It was just like all rhythm. There was no melody. That was even worse. I really didn't hear almost any melody. It was just like a heavy rhythm. I don't remember. It sounded like a bass, but it wasn't like, it didn't even sound like a bass player that I remember, but it did have like a bass and rhythm and not much melody. And that's my reaction when I hear a lot of the music now. It just doesn't sound as good to me. And you know, and it's not just the arrangement. I think a lot of 80s music, I didn't like the arrangement. I was kind of reacting to, you know, I still like the 70s and I didn't like MTV and all those things. And I was probably more narrow-minded as a younger man about some of those things anyway. And over the years, I've realized, well, you know, actually a lot of that music is really well done. But, you know, you've got to kind of erase like "You Are My Sunshine." Those are melodies. And, you know, the music like CCR, the Beatles, all those people, they came out of traditions where their brains are just soaked in all those melodies of popular song. And then you make your own popular songs. And I don't hear the melodic definition in a lot of newer music, and that's just one thing I would say. And like I said, there might be some out there, and I just don't know about it. But I guess if it's buried on somebody's Spotify playlist, that kind of proves my point, because I'm talking about popular music like those songs I'm talking about. Everybody knew, you know. I mean, almost everybody knows. You know, Leon Russell, Superstar, particularly probably the Karen Carpenter, beautiful version of it. But it's, you know, that sort of proves my point that, you know, there's, let me just check this here. My guitar's falling over. You're going to have to give me a minute here. I've been a bad boy. Trying to chill out. You know, but I actually think a lot of the music now is written. I don't even know if you'd call that "Closed on Sunday." Is that songwriting? I mean, I almost don't even feel like it's songwriting. It's all production and image and celebrity and a lot of rhythm. And so I didn't think it was almost like it wasn't even really a song. I guess you'll call it a song, but the other thing is, I wonder about the skills of a lot of younger players. Now, I want to again qualify that because there are a lot of great guitar players. You know, this is sort of true. It might be, you know, it might be true of melody too. Like I bet one place where you still hear a lot of really good melody is in theater. Like I actually thought the Beauty and the Beast and the Little Mermaid. What was the guy's name? Alan something that wrote those. It was so well. And then he died. And I remember at least after he died, like Beauty and the Beast and the Little Mermaid, whatever you thought of those shows, they had really cleverly written songs that were in that kind of theatrical tradition of the really clever melody and the lyrics, which I really respect. somewhat from afar, but that is kind of that melody type of thing I'm talking about. But I think the skills too, like the skill set of people, and I'm not just talking about technique, because one thing I'm pretty sure is true is some of the best guitar players in the history of the planet might be playing on YouTube right now and they're young, like in their teens and 20s even. Technically, some of the best guitar players, I would say. So we always kind of, Washington Post had that article, "Is the Guitar Dead?" Was that in 2017? I remember a lot of people talking about it. And they said there aren't younger players that are like Jimmy Page or Eric Clapton or, all the great guitar players of the 60s and 70s. And I sort of think that's true. I also think there are people on YouTube that just play amazing. But the other thing is most of those people are playing in a bedroom to backing tracks or something like that. And I'm not trying to be overly general here, but I think that's often the case. You see some of these unbelievable guitar players, and sometimes it doesn't seem like it's in the service of a song. So I'm talking about songs. So in a way, is some guy that's just one of the greatest virtuosos in the history of the instrument, but he's playing on YouTube to a backing track. Is that really the same as Keith Richards, playing Brown Sugar or something like that? I don't know. You tell me, but it seems like the guitar more in the service of a song is really important. Although, some of those guitar players I'm talking about that are so technically amazing, there's a lot of classical music like that actually, or jazz, where the focus is on virtuosity, and not necessarily the song per se. The song might have, or in a lot of classical music, but the best classical music and the best jazz still has a lot of melody. And I played some jazz. I certainly am no jazz musician, but I've sat in with jazz people, and one thing that always kind of got me through, like sitting in with some of those guys, was, at least the guys I was playing with, they would play like songs with melodies that were popular songs, like that Fake Book type stuff. So I remember we did like stuff from The King and I. What do we do? Hello, Young Lovers, and Shall We Dance? But they do it real jazzy. But if you knew the song, it was still like a verse, a chorus, and you could hear the melody, and they would highlight the melody. So I do think, I sometimes don't think the newer music has the melodic genius of some of those great songwriters of the 20th century. And I use Leon Russell as an example. He's got a bunch of great songs. Lady Blue, another one. Masquerade, the list goes on. So but sometimes I wonder, like a lot of younger players, you saw me talk about this the other day, they'll talk about like cowboy chords. So if you think like this is cowboy chords and you don't like doing that alternating bass, that's like a really, really traditional way of playing the guitar. And if you just dismiss that as cowboy chords, you just blew off 200 years worth of popular music, 500 years of popular music probably. But if you just, if you hear that, you just go, "Oh, those are cowboy chords. I don't play like that." You just blew off all the popular music pretty much. Because it doesn't have to be home on the range sitting on a horse, with the cowboy hat on. I mean, that's like a B, C, D, E, F, G, H. Those are, or like Jesus loves me, this I know, for the Bible. All those songs like that. Happy birthday to you. I mean, if you don't play like that, it seems like you're not set up to really play a lot of popular songs. Like if you're always shredding or doing all these kind of, I know you can take a lot of those songs and play them with different styles, so I'm not saying you have to play them. But that alternating bass, now that's a thing I don't see a lot of younger players do. Maybe in bluegrass and country for sure, but I mean, whereas that's all over a lot of rock. Keith Richards, I mean, they use that all over a lot of classic rock and popular music all through the popular music of AM music in the 60s and 70s. You had that like alternating bass, like tradition. That's like traditional good guitar playing. So I think if you kick that out of the equation, you're cutting yourself off from a whole tradition of popular music. And it's not just cowboy hats and Telecasters and country we're talking about. We're talking about like childhood songs and little hymns and folk songs that go back hundreds of years. And music is a linear progression. So if you don't relate to old songs like that, you've kind of broken the chain. There's that Fleetwood Mac song that I can still hear them saying, "It's never break the chain," because like Paul McCartney, he wrote such innovative songs, but he didn't break the chain. He kind of took the tradition and added to it, and that's the same with Cole Porter. All those guys, they took the tradition and added to it. But if you just say cowboy chords, I don't play like that. I don't play that kind of music, and just kind of noodle around. Uh, you're not really playing popular songs. And a lot of the music that I hear that's considered popular doesn't even have guitar in it. I was talking just a minute ago about people who play like unbelievable guitar on YouTube and things, but actually I don't even think you hear much guitar on the really popular stuff. Like if you go through those Spotify playlists, seemed like maybe a few months ago they were trying to get some songs out there that had a little bit of guitar. You do hear some great guitar and country music. I'm not that crazy about the newer country, but one thing I will say about it is they do have some damn good guitar in a lot of that newer country music. But I feel bad when people just say, I don't play cowboy chords, I don't do boomer bends, because that's like the whole tradition of music, you know. I mean, you're just basically blowing off everything, which is like a lot of things we've done in this country. Where you know, the past is always bad, and that's some people just they don't want to have anything to do with the past in other ways. But in music, that's really deadly. I'll call it Western. I think I mentioned I'll call it Western music. I don't know if that's the best term, but Western music is very highly evolved. Very, very highly evolved. Um, and there are parts of the world where they don't really, they wouldn't be able to have that kind of music. They might have their own music, but is some music better or worse? Is some music better or worse? So like is because I would argue that some of the music I've been talking about is better. I mean, it's better. Like a PS4 is better than a PS1. It's a linear progress. It's better. Like a word processor with Microsoft Word on it is better than a typewriter, and a typewriter was better than a quill pen, and a quill pen was better than scratching marks in wet clay tablets with the stick, which is how writing started. I'm talking about progress, and if you don't play cowboy chords, if you didn't grow up hearing all the music that's been before, you can't really add to it and create progress. And that's sometimes what I think I hear. It's a more limited type of music. I also think technology's negatively affected music. I know that's kind of a weird thing to say because recording technology is pretty amazing now. I bet I was listening to an old Nitty Gritty Dirt Band album the other day in the car, Dirt, Silver, and Gold. It's like all their early stuff. It's kind of like a greatest hits of the early part of the Nitty Gritty Dirt Band. And one thing I noticed about it is a lot of it sounded kind of muffled. You could tell it was when recording acoustic guitars is hard, and like when you hear acoustic guitars today, they sound that are really recorded well. They sound so pristine. And I was listening to that album, and everything sounded kind of muddy, like you were playing in like the guitar was wet or something, and it was kind of you had to turn the radio way up. And I thought, I bet you for $500 you could buy some little recording DAW or one of these little Zoom recorders that sound a lot better than that Dirt Band recording. Songs aren't better than the Dirt Band. The playing's not better than the Dirt Band necessarily because that's great. But in terms of recording quality, so it's weird that we do have like such good recording gear now, and it's so affordable, like for $500 you could probably buy something that's better than what a lot of people were recording albums on back in the late 60s. you know Anyway, in the 70s I think recording got a lot better, like Steely Dan, and some of those albums really sound great. And that's more like mid and late 70s stuff. But what is true is that was also like probably hundreds of thousands of dollars to get in a studio that could sound like that. And today I'm pretty sure you can get stuff that sounds really good for a couple $100. You know, uh, so I think the technologies, and I don't like the way that everything's gridded out. That was another thing when I watched Madonna. I was pretty. I didn't even see much of a band up there. I'm pretty sure it was all recorded, and it was probably all recorded with click tracks. It was probably all gridded. And what I noticed is the cameras like changed like that, and I'm sure they had the cameras hooked up to that grid. So like when she turned around, the camera would turn right with her, and it was all timed out to the grid. And you could see in a few spots, you could tell she was lip syncing. So I do think that that takes some of the human factor out of music. I You can listen to this in your car. It might be long. I'm probably going on long here. Going on long. But when it's all recorded and it's a grid like that, and you don't hear a lot of acoustic instruments in a lot of those electronic things. Like even I'll call it the electric guitar is in a way an acoustic instrument because the strings are being picked up. So you could even say an electric guitar is an acoustic instrument. Pianos, organs, those are acoustic instruments in a way. Drums are an acoustic instrument. I didn't hear much of that with that Madonna. And Madonna's certainly a lot better than a lot of the music now. I mean, she's 80s and 90s era. So, but even in her stuff, I didn't. It had that kind of machine sound, which was one reason I never liked new wave. I used to think it had that kind of machine sound. And again, I was probably reacting to cultural things or my own biases because I actually know there's actually some new wave that I've come to appreciate. One song is that. Modern English, I'll Stop the World and Melt with You. I'll turn that one up. That's a really nice song. And I'm sure there are a lot of good new wave songs, but I never took to that. But I always think of Brave New World and Brave New World by Aldous Huxley. I haven't read the book in a long time, but I do remember that people didn't really make music anymore in that Brave New World. And some part of your humanity is gone and you don't really make music anymore. So people would sit around in they had machines, kind of like talk about AI music now. They would have machines generate music. And it wasn't like a cool use of technology. Like technology can really enhance music. Look at all the great music that's been made and has been able to be made because of advancements in technology. But this was different than that. This is like the people had lost some part of their humanity that even made music. And I sometimes think music, it's a social thing as well. A lot of younger people, they don't get married, they don't have sex. Think about all those songs, and if you're not really thinking about love, that cuts out a whole tradition of popular music. And I don't just mean in a topical way, topically too, actually. I mean, if you don't have songs about the opposite sex and love, you just cut out 70-80% of all the popular music ever written. I guess you can still sing the wreck of the Edmund Fitzgerald, but if you cut out loving the opposite sex from music, you just like wiped out 70-80% of the catalog. I was talking to some younger people the other day, and I do think it's kind of like that because the other day I was talking to some younger people and I was telling them about David Cassidy. My sister used to love David Cassidy, and I said, yeah, David Cassidy in the early 70s, he'd do these concerts that would be 10,000 13-year-old girls there with their dad, and they'd all be passing out and fainting and rushing the stage. And they sort of like couldn't believe it. And they acted like I was talking about another planet or something. Like, really? No, the girls going crazy over some guy like that? I can't believe that, And I just thought, that's sort of sad in a way, because that was that's the hormones of love are kind of part of the hormones of music. And actually, if you think about it, if you have a lot of people that are forswearing love of the opposite sex, romance and marriage and commitment. And I'm not just talking about sex and the pleasure of it, but I'm talking about commitment to another person and things like that. We have so many broken homes. And I actually pitched a country song to some guy one time on Facebook that was like a Nashville guy, and he said he'd listened to one of my songs, and he said he liked it, but he also said it was. He said, "I'll just tell you right now that." Like they don't sing stuff like "Honey Angel," "You're so." Some artists do. That's what he told me. He said, a lot of songs now they have kind of an edge, and a lot of those real kind of mushy love songs don't translate. But if you have a lot of, if you think about it, if we're not coupling like we used to, we've got this massive divorce rate. Everybody hates each other, and a lot of times that hate trickles down to men and women and family. All the marriages have broken up. I actually think that has an effect on music. Because of all the wholesome love songs that have been written over the ages, that come from a commitment and a loyalty from one person to another. I think when people don't grow up, I don't think a lot of people grow up with music in church or school, and that makes it really hard. If you don't hear good music in church and school, you don't grow up with a sense of songs. And I think in that other video I said I feel like some guitar players, like their first lesson wasn't like how to play a G chord. Their first lesson was how to shred on the 15th fret, and they turn into these amazing shredders. But you wonder if they could ever like play like just really nice accompaniment with their thumb to do it, like Edelweiss or any of those types of songs, because that's where great popular music comes from. Because popular music you take any popular song that I'm thinking of, and you can break it down. Usually they're piano or organ. Sometimes songs or piano or guitar. A lot of times songs are kind of written on piano or guitar. Other instruments probably too, but those are usually the two. And you can strip away all the arrangements and usually play them with those so-called cowboy chords on a guitar or the comparable chords on a piano. And that's a tradition, and it's a really old tradition. And if we're not passing the tradition on to young people, if young people aren't relating to that tradition, then yeah, our music's really going to take a hit. And if it just becomes a lot of scales without the human connection of songs, that would really be sad. So so I kind of wanted to talk a little bit about that. I wasn't quite sure what I wanted to say. I said I'm just going to turn on the camera and talk about this subject. I have some notes. But yeah, when I hear newer music, I don't care before much for it. And there's been plenty of music I didn't like, and there's been plenty of music I liked that wasn't all that good, frankly. I'm trying to think of music I liked that wasn't actually good. I mean, I've heard like novelty songs that were kind of bad on purpose, like "Shut Up Your Face" or some of that stuff. I always like Sonny and Cher. A lot of people say he couldn't sing, but their music's so much better than anything that I'm talking about, like Kanye West or some of those people. It's just not even close. So, because they sang songs, it's really important to have songs. And the final thought is leave it better than you found it. That's the old Boy Scout motto, and my wife taught a little private school, and that was their motto. So leave it better than you found it. So you take the tradition, but you're part of a heritage, and you leave it better than you found it. But if you just blow off that heritage, then really what you have are just kind of what's left, and you kind of pick it over. But as time goes by, the things kind of die on the vine. It's like picking grapes and eating them and not saving the seeds, to grow for new crop in the spring. So we need to teach other people these traditions, and I was just thinking how that choir director all those years ago explained how a sixth was My Bonnie Lies Over the Ocean. That always made an impression on me, and a fourth was Here Comes the Bride. He had some other examples. I think Beethoven's Fifth Symphony. What's that? G to E minor, maybe, I don't know, but anyway, whatever it is. But some of those classic intervals of songs, and that stuck with me. But it wouldn't have made sense to me if he just explained a sixth and didn't know any songs. It would have just been like a math class or something, which is sometimes I think how a lot of theory gets taught. Because I actually don't like that choir. We all knew what he was talking about when he said My Bonnie Lies Over the Ocean, and then that made the idea of a sixth interval make sense. You enter into music through songs, not through theory. If all you have is theory, then it's like learning math. It's like learning a bunch of grammar in a foreign language and never learning to speak it. Take a bunch of tests on a foreign language and ace all the tests, but you can't really speak it, which actually American education has a problem in that regard. We should leave it better than we found it, and that means being part of a tradition of music and trying to instill that in younger people. And I don't really see that in some of the newer music, and to the extent it's out there, like I said, it might be buried on Spotify somewhere, which I don't really think is the same thing. So, well, those are my thoughts. Kind of rambled. You can play it in your car. I'm going to do these more often. Just if you want to listen to them, that's fine. If you don't, that's fine too. But those are my thoughts. And I love music, and I worry about our country sometimes. I worry, for the obvious reasons. But socially and culturally, I also worry because there's so many things we need to pass on, and music is part of our history. It's part of our heritage. So if you have people that don't even know like the most familiar songs in the history of our country, it says something much deeper and more disturbing about the future of our country. Then maybe they don't know little songs or something. And I'm not saying, everybody needs to, memorize these 10 songs and take a test on it to be an American citizen or something. I'm just saying it's too bad when the natural kind of organic transmission of a musical heritage is interrupted the way I feel it's been interrupted in recent years. And yeah, there are a lot of parts of the world where they don't have as much music. I mean, the sort of industry standard is Western pop music for music. And it was, if you look at the history of that, it was the music that we grew up with in the 20th century was the end result of hundreds of years of evolution and that passing on, that transmitting of the heritage. And at some point, you just kind of pick the fruit and eat it. And we're a consumer culture. The lawyers don't want us to play half those songs. That's so that's what they're doing. They're just taking it and they're just going to use it. They're going to get all the royalties. A lot of times for songs that are 80 years old, they're just going to sit there and get rich, and then we'll all die, and the music will die. So no, we didn't leave it better than we found it. We hurt music. And that would be a real shame. So songs are really important, and if you don't have songs that are great melodies, then that to me is one of the most damning indictments of new music. And I hope I'm wrong, and I'm not even saying I'm right or that's true. I'm just saying that's my impression. That's my feeling. Those aren't really my thoughts or beliefs. That's kind of my feeling when I hear newer music. As a guy that grew up with some of the greatest music in the history of this world, for sure. So, thanks. God bless. Listen to this in your car or something like that. Hope I didn't ramble too much. I actually had some notes. I need to quit these things. It's another thing I started during the pandemic along with this YouTube channel are these things. I hadn't smoked a cigarette since I was like in my early 20s. And I need to stop. But thanks, God bless. And let's pass the tradition on. Let's leave it better than we found it. Let's not just take what we have, consume it. That's a consumer culture. You're not really adding to it. You're just taking it and consuming it, and then it's thrown out when it's not worth anything anymore. That's what I think in the last 20 years or so we've moved into as a consumer culture. We don't transmit the music. We don't transmit it in our schools. We don't transmit it in our churches, really, I would say. All those little melodies that kids grow up with. That's what as kids get older and seasoned and learn to play guitar or piano, that's what makes the great songwriters. People who grew up with all that music. Definitely. Thanks. God bless.